Dr. Nathaniel Rhodes leaned back in his chair at the morning case conference, his hands folded loosely over his chest. The overhead lights hummed faintly, the smell of coffee and disinfectant thick in the air. A third-year resident, Dr. Elena Park, was presenting her patient, a complex case of multi-system involvement, with lab results and differential diagnoses lined neatly on the projected slides. Her voice was steady, but Nathaniel wasn't really listening. He stared at her for a moment too long, and when she concluded with her proposed treatment plan, he let out a chuckle. "Not bad for a pretty face," he said. The words landed like a dropped tray. For a moment, silence reigned. Elena's smile faltered, her cheeks coloring. The younger residents glanced at each other nervously, while the older physicians looked down at their notes as if pretending not to hear. Nurse Lydia Moreno, seated near the back, stiffened. She had worked with Dr. Rhodes for 8 years and had never heard him say anything like that. Nathaniel was known for his formality, his clipped professionalism. Never crude, never dismissive. Elena forced a laugh, nodding quickly before continuing, "So, as I was saying." But Lydia couldn't shake it. His face wasn't smirking, wasn't teasing. It was blank, distracted, like his mind was somewhere else entirely. By afternoon, the moment had already been brushed aside. "Stress," some muttered. "He's exhausted." But for Lydia, it gnawed her. She caught him later in the day, standing in the physician's lounge, staring at the wall. His lips moved faintly, words spilling too softly to hear. "Dr. Rhodes," she said, stepping closer. He blinked, startled, then straightened. "Lydia, you need something?" "No, just checking in." He smiled thinly. "Always checking. That's what they like about you." She frowned, but he walked away before she could ask what he meant. That night, she wrote the incident in her notebook. Not gossip. Not speculation. Just fact. Something was happening to him, and she needed a record. The cracks spread. During rounds the next morning, Nathaniel stopped mid-sentence while explaining a patient's labs. He stared up at the ceiling vent, brow furrowing. "Do you hear that?" he asked suddenly. The team exchanged uneasy glances. "Hear what, doctor?" "The buzzing. They've wired the vents." "Listening." Nobody responded. He cleared his throat, flipping his chart abruptly, and continued as if nothing had happened. Later, with a patient recovering from pneumonia, he leaned close and whispered, careful with deep breaths. "The air isn't safe. Small sips only." The patient blinked in alarm. Lydia intervened quickly, steering him back into the hallway. "Dr. Rhodes, can I speak to you?" He turned sharply, eyes blazing. "What?" "You think I'm wrong. I think the patient needs reassurance." He gave a low chuckle. "Reassurance is poison. Smiles, promises, lies." And he walked away, leaving her chilled. Over the following week, errors began appearing in the system. Orders written in Nathaniel's name that made no sense, tenfold medication doses, contraindicated drug combinations. Each time, a nurse caught it, corrected it, and whispered uneasily to another. Confronted, Nathaniel shook his head. "It's not me. The system is compromised. They're altering my orders." "Who?" asked Dr. Ravi Patel cautiously. Nathaniel leaned forward, eyes darting side to side. "If you can't see them, you're already theirs." Patel froze, unsettled. Lydia added the exchange to her notebook. One evening, she found him in the supply room, staring at the shelves of 4 fluids. His hands twitched as he muttered, "Contaminated. All of it. They'll thin the herd, one bag at a time." "Dr. Rhodes," she said softly, "these are safe." "You really believe that?" He grabbed a bag, hurled it against the wall, fluid exploding in a spray. "That's what they want, obedience." "Blindness." She backed toward the door. "You need rest. You need help." But his eyes narrowed. "You're one of them, aren't you?" She fled before he could say more. Alarms began going off more frequently. An oxygen tank inexplicably empty. A ventilator alarm silenced. Each time, disaster averted only by vigilant staff. Each time, Nathaniel's login, Nathaniel's key card, Nathaniel's shadow nearby. Finally, Lydia caught him directly. He was crouched at the main oxygen manifold, twisting valves with trembling hands. "Dr. Rhodes," she shouted. He turned, sweat slicking his brow. "Don't stop me. They've poisoned the lines. I have to purge them before they kill everyone. You're the one endangering them." "No." His voice cracked. "They're not even real, Lydia. None of them are real." Her stomach dropped. It was more than paranoia. He didn't believe in the patients anymore. She hit the emergency code. Alarms blared. Staff poured into the corridor. Nathaniel bolted, shoving past startled nurses, weaving between patients. "They're puppets," he screamed. "I'll cut the strings." Security chased, finally tackling him near the stairwell. He thrashed, snarling, eyes wild. "You'll regret this. They'll replace me, and then you'll see." Lydia stood frozen, trembling as restraints were secured. The man who had once been their most brilliant physician was dragged away like a mad prophet no one could understand. In the aftermath, administrators scrambled. Official statements said only that Dr. Rhodes was on leave. Staff whispered furiously, rumors spreading through wards like wildfire. Some pitied him. Others cursed him. Patients murmured about the doctor dragged away in restraints. Lydia sat in the break room, head in her hands. James Tran, a respiratory therapist and her closest colleague, squeezed her shoulder. "You stopped him." "I was too late," she whispered. "He could have. But he didn't," James said firmly. "Because of you." Still, she couldn't shake the memory of his voice. "They're not even real." Nathaniel's name was scrubbed from schedules, but the shadow of his unraveling lingered. New safeguards were put in place. Mandatory cross-checks, psychiatric evaluations for staff, but everyone knew it had come at a cost. At night, Lydia dreamed of him, whispering to walls, staring at vents. She saw him crouched at the oxygen lines, convinced he was saving lives when he was seconds from ending them. She wondered how many signs they had missed. How much earlier they could have stopped him. How many cracks had been smoothed over with words like stress or fatigue. Months later, she heard rumors he'd been committed to a locked psychiatric ward across town. Some said he barely spoke. Others said he still whispered constantly, muttering about infiltrators and poisoned air. One evening, Lydia drove past the facility and parked outside. She didn't go in. She just sat in her car, staring at the darkened windows. Somewhere inside, Nathaniel Rhodes, the man who had once been their most trusted physician, was lost in the fog of his own mind. She whispered softly, "I hope you find peace." The hospital moved on, as hospitals always did. New crises, new faces, new patients in need. The legend of Nathaniel Rhodes became a cautionary tale told quietly in break rooms and whispered to new staff, "Watch your colleagues. Notice the cracks. Don't ignore the little things." But for Lydia Moreno, it was more than a tale. It was a scar she carried into every shift, every patient, every uneasy glance when a colleague seemed a little off. Because she had seen brilliance turn to madness. And she had learned that the smallest remark, dismissed by everyone else, could be the first ripple in a tidal wave. And let's continue to our next story. Dr. Marcus Ellery was a man of poise. For nearly 15 years, his calm voice and steady hands had been the backbone of the emergency department at Westlake Medical Center. Residents admired him, nurses relied on him, and patients often requested him by name. But that morning at the 8 a.m. briefing, he said something that silenced the room. A young resident, Dr. Hannah Lynn, nervously finished her presentation about a patient who had been admitted overnight with sepsis. Her voice shook as she read off the vitals and labs, but her conclusions were sharp, her plan thorough. Marcus gave her a long, unreadable look, then said, "Not bad for a girl." The words dropped like a scalpel on tile. The group froze. Hannah's face flushed crimson, her mouth opening slightly before she snapped it shut. A few of the older doctors shifted uncomfortably, eyes averted. Most said nothing. Only Nurse Dana Alvarez, sitting in the corner with her chart, stared directly at Marcus. She had worked alongside him for almost a decade. He was meticulous, exacting, sometimes arrogant, but never openly demeaning. That comment wasn't him. "Thank you," Hannah muttered, forcing a smile as she gathered her papers. The meeting lurched forward as though nothing had happened. But Dana felt her stomach twist. Marcus wasn't smirking. He wasn't even paying attention anymore. He was staring at the conference room door, lips moving faintly, whispering words she couldn't hear. Later that morning, Dana caught up with Hannah by the nurse's station. "You all right?" Dana asked gently. Hannah shrugged. "I guess. I've dealt with worse in med school." That wasn't normal. Not for him. "Everyone says he's brilliant," Hannah said quickly, defensive even now. Maybe he was just tired? Dana wanted to believe that. Everyone was tired. Westlake's ER had been stretched thin for months, staff shortages, flu season, back-to-back trauma nights. But still, that remark, coming from Marcus Ellery, wasn't stress. It was a crack. The crack widened. That evening, during rounds, Marcus stopped abruptly while examining a patient's chart. He tilted his head upward, frowning at the ceiling. "Do you hear it?" he asked. The resident beside him glanced up. "Hear what?" "The signal." His voice was low, almost reverent. "They've wired the vents. They're listening." The patient shifted uneasily on the bed. Dana stepped in quickly, touching Marcus's sleeve. "Doctor, maybe we should step outside." He pulled his arm away sharply, eyes narrowing. "You don't hear it?" "No," Dana said softly. He stared at her for a long moment, then muttered something under his breath and scribbled furiously into the chart. By the end of the week, mistakes began creeping into his orders. A tenfold dose of heparin, caught by a vigilant nurse. A canceled antibiotic order, leaving a septic patient vulnerable. Each error had Marcus's login attached. When confronted, Marcus grew defensive. "The system's been hacked," he snapped. "You think I'd make mistakes like that? They're altering my orders." "Who's they?" asked Dr. Patel, one of the younger attendings. Marcus leaned closer, his voice a whisper. "If you can't see them yet, you're already compromised." Patel recoiled, unsettled. Dana, standing nearby, scribbled it down later in her notebook. She had started writing everything: odd remarks, whispered mutterings, misplaced orders. Not gossip, evidence. One night, Dana walked into the supply closet and froze. Marcus stood motionless before the rows of 4 fluids, his hands twitching at his sides. His lips moved rapidly, whispering words too low to catch. Then suddenly, he snatched a bag from the shelf and hurled it to the floor. Fluid burst across the linoleum. "They're contaminated," he hissed. "Every one of them. You can't use these. They're killing them slowly." "Marcus," Dana began, voice calm, careful. "You really believe they're safe?" His eyes darted to hers, wild and bloodshot. "That's what they want you to think." Obedience. Blindness. He grabbed another bag, raising it high. Dana stepped forward quickly. "Marcus, stop. Please. Let's go talk." But he dropped the bag back on the shelf, shaking his head. "You'll see. Sooner than you think." He pushed past her and strode out, leaving the mess on the floor. Dana's hands trembled as she cleaned up the shards. She couldn't shake the look in his eyes, fevered, certain, dangerous. The sabotage escalated. An oxygen tank discovered empty despite being marked full. A ventilator alarm disabled. A dialysis filter missing. Each time, disaster narrowly averted by vigilant staff. Each time, Marcus nearby, offering excuses no one believed. Finally, one night, Dana caught him crouched near the central oxygen manifold in the ICU, his hands on the valves. "Marcus," she shouted. He whirled around, sweat streaming down his face. "You don't understand. They've poisoned the lines. I have to purge them before they kill everyone. You're the one endangering them." "No," he rasped, his voice cracking. "They're not even real, Dana. Don't you see? None of them are real." Her heart dropped. He didn't believe in the patients anymore. She lunged for the emergency phone, slamming the code. Alarms blared overhead. Staff rushed into the corridor. Marcus bolted, shoving past nurses, weaving between patients. "They're puppets," he screamed. "I'll cut the strings." Security sprinted after him. He barreled through the ward, knocking over carts, shouting warnings no one understood. Finally, near the stairwell, Two guards tackled him hard. He thrashed violently, snarling, "You're blind. All of you. They'll replace me, and then you'll see." Dana stood frozen, breathless, as they restrained him. The man who had once been Westlake's most trusted physician was dragged away, raving like a mad prophet. The ICU corridor was eerily silent after the chaos. The alarms still blinked red across the nurses' station. The oxygen lines still hissed faintly where Marcus had twisted them, but the shouting was gone. The sound of his voice still echoed in Dana's ears. "They're not even real." She leaned against the wall, her knees threatening to give out. A young nurse, barely 6 months into the job, whispered, "Was that really Dr. Ellery?" Dana nodded, her throat tight. Yes, that was him. Security escorted Marcus out of the building in restraints, his lab coat smeared from the scuffle. His eyes had been wide, bloodshot, but oddly triumphant, as if he believed he had won something by being caught. That night, administration held an emergency meeting. Dana was summoned along with Dr. Patel, Dr. Lin, and a handful of others who had witnessed the confrontation. Mr. Harrington, the hospital director, rubbed his temples as though the weight of the building sat squarely on his shoulders. "Dr. Ellery has been placed on indefinite leave," he said. "He's being evaluated at St. Margaret's psychiatric unit." "Indefinite leave?" Dana repeated, incredulous. "He tried to tamper with the oxygen lines. Patients could have died." Harrington's eyes hardened. "We are aware. But the board wants this handled delicately. Marcus Ellery has been a pillar of this hospital for over a decade. Families request him by name. Donors know him. We cannot afford scandal." "It's not scandal," Dana shot back. "It's safety." Harrington's jaw tightened. "You'll file your report, Nurse Alvarez. Keep it clinical. Nothing speculative." Dana wanted to scream, but she forced herself to nod. In the days that followed, the hospital tried to return to normal. But nothing felt normal. Staff whispered in corners. Residents who once idolized Marcus avoided mentioning his name. Patients asked why their favorite doctor wasn't around, and no one knew what to say. Dana sat with Hannah Lynn in the cafeteria one afternoon. Hannah stirred her soup absent-mindedly. "Do you think we could have stopped it sooner?" Dana hesitated. "Maybe." But no one wanted to believe it. He was Marcus. Untouchable. Hannah's eyes filled with guilt. "That first day, when he made the comment about me, I should have said something." "That wasn't your fault," Dana said firmly. "His unraveling didn't start with you. It started long before that. We just didn't see it." Strange stories began to surface from other staff. A pharmacist swore Marcus had come down to the dispensary weeks ago, demanding to inspect vials for tampering. A janitor recalled him standing in the lobby at 3 a.m., muttering at the security cameras. Every story added another brick to the wall of dread. James Tran, the respiratory therapist, cornered Dana one evening. "He was obsessed with me for weeks," James confessed. "Kept asking if I'd checked the vents, if I noticed the humming. At first I thought it was just eccentric, but he trailed off, shaking his head. I should have said something sooner." "We all should have," Dana admitted quietly. Administration tried to smooth it over. Emails went out. "Staff wellness is a priority. Please report concerns immediately. Counseling services are available." But the staff didn't trust it. They had raised concerns. They had whispered, warned, questioned. And nothing had been done until Marcus was twisting valves with his bare hands. One night, Dana stayed late to finish charts. The corridors were quiet, the kind of quiet that seemed to stretch shadows longer. As she walked past the locked supply room, she froze. There were scratch marks on the door. Deep, jagged grooves, as though someone had clawed desperately to get in or out. Her stomach turned. She knew they hadn't been there the night before. The next morning, she reported it to Harrington. He frowned, then waved it off. "Maintenance. Probably some equipment scraped the door." "No," Dana insisted. It looked deliberate. He gave her a thin smile. "Nurse Alvarez, I respect your vigilance. But we cannot chase ghosts. Focus on your patients." Ghosts. That's what they wanted Marcus to become, a ghost, whispered about but never addressed directly. But ghosts didn't leave scratches and steel doors. That weekend, Dana drove past St. Margaret's psychiatric unit. She didn't go in. She just sat in her car across the street, staring at the sterile brick building. Somewhere inside, Marcus Ellery was pacing, whispering to walls, convinced he was saving the world from invisible enemies. She remembered his eyes as security dragged him away, wild, but not empty. He believed what he said. Every word. And that, she realized with a shiver, was what made him so dangerous. The hospital did not forget. Though administration tried to scrub Marcus's name from schedules and announcements, the memory of his collapse clung like mildew. Staff avoided speaking it aloud, but whispers lived in every corridor. They say he tried to cut the oxygen off. No, he thought it was poisoned. That's what I heard. He was always intense. Maybe it was only a matter of time. Dana heard it all, passing through break rooms, walking past vending machines, in the elevator between shifts. His name had become a ghost story. Patients weren't blind either. One elderly woman asked Dana directly, "Why was Dr. Ellery taken away in handcuffs?" Dana hesitated, then said softly, "He's unwell. He's getting help." The woman nodded, but looked unconvinced. Rumors had a way of slipping through locked doors and sterile walls. That night, Dana sat at her kitchen table, notebook open. She flipped back through her entries, every strange comment, every whispered muttering, every unsafe order. But a question gnawed at her. How long had this been building? Had they all been blind for months? Years? 2 weeks later, the answer began to take shape. Lydia, one of the charge nurses, pulled Dana aside in the medication room. "I found something in the old narcotics logs," she whispered. "From 3 months ago. Marcus signed out fentanyl vials, but they were never documented as administered to any patient." Dana's stomach dropped. "Are you saying he?" "I don't know. Maybe it was an error. But 3 times? That's not an accident." Dana scribbled it down later in her notebook. If Marcus had been diverting drugs or hoarding them, his unraveling might have started long before anyone noticed. One evening, she met James Tran in the staff lounge. He looked restless, rubbing at his temples. "Dana," he said quietly, "I keep thinking about the vents." She raised an eyebrow. "The humming," he continued. "I thought he was paranoid. But now, when I'm in the ICU at night, I swear I hear it too. A low vibration. Maybe it's nothing, just equipment, but—" She leaned forward. "You're not losing it, James. Machines hum. Lights buzz." He twisted that into something else. "That's what paranoia does. It takes normal things and makes monsters out of them." James nodded, but his face remained troubled. One night, Dana had to walk through the closed psychiatric wing on her way to a consult. She slowed as she passed a nurse at the desk. "Ellery's here, isn't he?" Dana asked softly. The nurse glanced up, surprised, then lowered her voice. "Yeah, locked ward. He doesn't say much. Sometimes mutters about strings, signals. The usual." "The usual?" Dana repeated. "You'd be surprised how many think the vents are listening." Dana walked away with a chill running down her spine. Marcus wasn't unique. But he was theirs, Westlake's trusted physician, the man who had carried so many codes, who had saved lives with a steady hand. And if it could happen to him, it could happen to anyone. The weight of mistrust settled heavily over the ER. Every raised voice, every forgotten order, every late-night mistake sparked questions. Is it happening again? Are we missing another one? Residents who once brimmed with confidence second-guessed themselves. Nurses exchanged wary glances during rounds. Even Dana, vigilant and sharp, felt her nerves fray. One night, she charted until nearly midnight. The ER was quiet, too quiet. She heard a faint creak behind her and spun around, only to find the supply closet door ajar. Slowly, she stepped forward. Inside, in the dim light, was an empty shelf where 4 bags should have been. Her heart pounded. She knew they had been stocked earlier that day. The next morning, she reported it. The charge nurse frowned. "Are you sure? Maybe inventory missed them." "Maybe," Dana muttered. But she couldn't shake the image, Marcus standing before the shelves, whispering. Later that day, she overheard 2 orderlies talking. "They say he used to stay here after hours," one said. walk the halls, muttering about wires in the walls. Security caught him once at 4 a.m. in the ICU. Dana froze. She had never heard that story before. How many warning signs had been brushed aside? How many times had he been excused because of his reputation? Her notebook grew heavier with every entry, a burden of evidence that came too late. That evening, as she left the hospital, Dana stopped at the glass doors. For just a moment, she thought she saw Marcus's reflection standing beside her, eyes bloodshot, lips moving silently. She blinked. The reflection was gone. Only her own weary face stared back. Still, the words rang in her ears. They're not even real. She whispered into the empty night, "We should have seen you sooner." Marcus's absence left a hole that no one could quite fill. His name was erased from schedules, his locker cleaned out, his office locked. But his ghost was everywhere. In every emergency intubation, residents remembered his steady hands. In every code, staff thought of his booming commands. The hospital had been built partly on his reputation, and now that foundation had cracked. The administration doubled down on secrecy. Officially, Marcus Ellery was on extended medical leave. Nothing more. Families who asked were told he was resting. Donors were reassured that the hospital was stronger than ever. But the staff knew better. They had seen him twist the valves, had heard his shouts echo down the ICU hallways. They remembered the wild light in his eyes. Dana felt the silence like a stone pressing on her chest. To her, it wasn't just about Marcus, it was about what the hospital refused to face. 3 weeks later, Dana was called to testify at a board review. The room was long and sterile, filled with suits and ties. Harrington sat at the head of the table. "Ms. Alvarez," one board member asked, "do you believe Dr. Ellery posed an immediate threat to patient safety?" "Yes," Dana said without hesitation. "And did you attempt to intervene?" "Yes." "Did the administration respond appropriately to your concerns?" Her eyes flicked to Harrington, then back to the board. "No." The silence that followed was sharp as broken glass. After the meeting, Harrington cornered her in the hall. His voice was low, controlled. "You've made your point. But be careful how loudly you say it. This hospital is bigger than any one of us." Dana held his gaze. So was Marcus. And look what happened. She walked away before he could answer. Meanwhile, stories trickled back from St. Margaret's. A nurse friend of Dana's who picked up shifts there told her Marcus spent most of his days pacing, muttering. Sometimes he shouted at cameras, swearing they were recording his every move. But there were moments, brief, fleeting, when he seemed lucid. Once, he told her friend, "I used to save lives. Now they won't let me." Dana thought about that for days afterward. The tragedy of it. A brilliant physician swallowed by his own mind. The staff at Westlake tried to move on. New attendings rotated in, filling Marcus's shifts. Patients kept coming, crises kept unfolding, the river of medicine never stopped flowing. But the trust had shifted. Nurses double-checked every order, even from doctors they trusted. Residents grew wary of challenging seniors, afraid of hidden tempers. The camaraderie that once defined the ER was fractured, replaced by suspicion. One night, during a lull, Hannah Lynn asked Dana, "Do you think it could happen to me? To any of us?" Dana thought carefully before answering. "I think it could happen to anyone who stops being heard. Who cracks, little by little, while everyone looks away." Months passed. The oxygen manifold was replaced, the supply closets restocked, the scratched door repainted. Physical scars could be scrubbed. But the memory lived in the people. On the anniversary of Marcus's breakdown, Dana found herself back in the same conference room. Another resident was presenting a case, this one trembling with nerves. Dana caught the fear in the young woman's eyes, the same fear she'd seen in Hannah's months ago, when Marcus dismissed her with a sexist remark. When the resident finished, the room was quiet. Dana leaned forward and said clearly, "That was excellent work. Thank you for being thorough." The resident's face brightened with relief. The room seemed lighter, if only a little. That night, Dana walked out of the hospital and paused at the doors. The city hummed beyond, traffic, voices, life moving forward. She looked back once, up at the windows glowing against the dark sky. Marcus's ghost lingered there, in every vent and shadow. But so did the lesson: listen, notice, speak. Don't ignore the cracks, even when they appear in the strongest among you. Because brilliance could turn to madness in a whisper, and ignoring it could nearly cost everything. Dana whispered into the night, not sure who she was speaking to. "We'll do better next time." Then she walked to her car, the weight of the hospital heavy behind her, but the faintest hope ahead. And last but not least, Dr. Ethan Marlowe had always been the kind of physician who believed in order. His charts were immaculate, his handwriting precise, his tie knotted the same way every morning. The emergency department at Crescent Valley Hospital thrived on chaos, but Ethan prided himself on being the calm at its center. Or at least, that's how it used to be. Lately, staff had begun to notice cracks in that calm. Not in the way he sutured wounds or managed cardiac arrests. He was still technically flawless, but in something quieter, subtler. A coldness in his triage decisions. An impatience with patients who didn't fit his definition of serious. It started small. A woman came in with chest pain at 10 p.m. Ethan glanced at her EKG, saw no ST elevations, and waved her off. "It's anxiety," he said, writing stable, discharge, before she could even argue. 2 hours later, she was back. Another doctor caught the subtle T-wave changes Ethan had missed. She was admitted with unstable angina. The nurses exchanged uneasy looks. By the end of the month, there had been more. A young man with abdominal pain doubled over in the waiting room. Ethan ordered no labs, no imaging, just Tylenol. "Gastroenteritis," he declared, sending him home. The next morning, the man collapsed at his job site. Ruptured appendix. Then a diabetic woman with a foot wound. Ethan barely glanced at it before saying, "Follow up with your primary care." She returned 4 days later septic, her leg mottled and swollen. Each time, the pattern was the same. Patients turned away, dismissed, told to go elsewhere. Nurse Carla Jimenez had been in the ER long enough to see physicians make mistakes, but this felt different. Mistakes were human. But Ethan wasn't second-guessing himself. He was refusing to look in the first place. One night, after yet another confrontation over a patient Ethan had refused to admit, Carla confronted him directly at the nurse's station. "Why didn't you run basic labs?" she demanded, holding up the chart. He had a fever and abdominal guarding. Ethan didn't even look up from his coffee. "Not everything needs a workup. We're drowning as it is." Drowning isn't an excuse to abandon patients. He set the cup down slowly, his eyes finally meeting hers. They were sharp, almost icy. "Do you know how many malingerers walk through those doors every night? How many drug seekers? Hypochondriacs? If I ordered tests on every complaint, we'd collapse under our own weight." Carla's voice hardened. "And if you send someone home to die?" For just a moment, something flickered in his eyes, uncertainty, maybe even guilt. But then it was gone. "That's not going to happen." It did happen. 2 weeks later, an elderly man came in short of breath, pale, sweating. Ethan glanced at him, checked one set of vitals, and shook his head. Panic attack. He sent him back out into the night with instructions to relax. The man collapsed in his car. Pulmonary embolism. He died before EMS could bring him back inside. The ER was quiet for days afterward, a heavy silence weighing on everyone. Ethan carried on as if nothing had happened. But Carla couldn't. She wrote everything in her report, every detail. When administration requested incident reviews, she was the first to speak up. It wasn't the first complaint they'd received. By the time the next mortality review rolled around, Ethan Marlowe's name was on the agenda. Administrators combed through charts. A stack of grievances sat thick on the table: misdiagnoses, premature discharges, families who had written letters demanding answers. Ethan was called into the boardroom one morning, his tie as straight as ever, his expression unreadable. Carla was there too, along with other staff who had filed complaints. The chief medical officer leaned forward. "Dr. Marlowe, you are being investigated for a pattern of turning patients away without adequate evaluation. Several of these cases resulted in serious harm, even death." Ethan's voice was cool, steady. You're mistaking efficiency for negligence. I keep this department moving. Without me, your waiting times would double. Carla slammed her pen down. At the cost of lives. His jaw tightened. You don't understand the burden we carry. If I investigated every cough, every stomach ache, we'd drown. Sometimes you have to cut the dead weight. The words stunned the room. Dead weight. Carla repeated, her voice rising. Those are people. Human beings who trusted us. For the first time, Ethan's composure cracked. His hands trembled against the table, his eyes flicking from one administrator to the next. You think you care more than I do? I've given this hospital my life. I decide who needs saving. Not you. Me. The silence that followed was suffocating. The board suspended him that afternoon. News spread fast. Staff whispered in break rooms. Families muttered in waiting areas. Ethan Marlowe, the once unshakable anchor of Crescent Valley ER, had been benched. Carla stood at the nurse's station, watching as security escorted him to collect his things. His tie was still straight, his posture rigid, but his eyes were dark hollows. As he passed her, he paused. You think you've won, Carla. But when this place collapses without me, remember who held it together. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Because even now, even after all the harm, part of her remembered the doctor he had been, the one who taught residents with patience, who stayed hours after shift to comfort a grieving family, who once fought tooth and nail to get a patient into an ICU bed upstairs. She wondered when that man had disappeared. Weeks passed. Ethan's case went to peer review, then to the state medical board. More stories surfaced, families writing letters, patients describing how they had been dismissed. Some were alive to complain. Some were not. Crescent Valley Hospital tightened its protocols. No patient could be discharged without documented labs if presenting with certain complaints. Nurses were empowered to flag unsafe discharges. The department moved slower, yes, but safer. Carla sat at her desk one night, flipping through charts. The ER hummed around her, chaotic as ever. But this time, she felt a strange steadiness. Patients were being seen, truly seen. She closed her notebook, the one where she had written every troubling moment with Ethan. She slid it into her locker, exhaling slowly.